Hello, 7th grade, it's Miss Odell. I'm here to start. It is Tuesday, May the 4th, and this is Life Science. I hope you guys are doing well. Today we are on 15B, which is titled Circulation, but we're really going to be talking about the circulatory system in more depth than we have in the past. Circulation in our body. All right, so follow along with me as well as taking notes on page 311, and we're going to be working through page 316. We've got a lot of information here to cover, so be patient with me, all right? So, the body's delivery system, and that's what the circulatory system is referred to as, is the body's delivery system. But the definition of the circulatory system here is the multiple organs in our body, and they work together. They cannot work alone. They have to work together to transport nutrients and oxygen to the cells, and then it removes waste and carbon dioxide. Okay? Now, moving on to the next page, we're going to be talking about the body's delivery system again, and we are talking about the circulatory system. So here we see that the circulatory system moves substance around your body. Now, it is vital for homeostasis. Let's remind ourselves what homeostasis is. We've talked about that off and on all year. Homeostasis is when an organism has the ability to keep its internal process stable, meaning that there's no major deficiency in any of your organ systems. It keeps it at a normal level. All right? So, the circulatory system is very important when it comes to homeostasis. So now let's move on and talk about the heart, okay? And we're talking about the circulatory system, or beats. Remember, I think we've talked about this before, but your heart typically beats about 70 times per minute on average. Everyone's average is fairly different. I've always heard about 80 is normal. Of a heart rate is what they call it, but the textbook 70, so we'll go with it. All right, so let's talk about the heart. So it is made of involuntary cardiac muscles. We talked about that as well in the past. So let's talk about the heart has 4 chambers, and I've got a little picture of that over here. Okay, so you have the blue here at the top is the right atrium. Over here at the top is the left atrium of the heart. Look at the bottom. This part is the ventricles, and the blue is the right ventricle, and the left is referring to, the red is referring to your left ventricle. Now, blood enters through the 2 upper atria, which is this here, okay? And it leaves through the ventricles, which is really muscles, but let's move on. Now, so blood travels away from the heart through arteries. Remember, I told you before, A for away for your arteries, and then it returns back through your veins, okay? Let's talk about capillaries. If you look with me on page 313, okay, so this little diagram represents your capillaries, your arteries, and your veins. Remember, your capillaries connect the arteries to the veins. So I'm going to write on this so you can see. It's the same thing as you have in your textbook, but this is referring to number 6, which is referring to your capillaries, because they connect the arteries to the veins, okay? So the red is going away from the heart, and this is referring to number 4, which is the arteries. And then this is number 5, which is considered your veins, which allows blood to flow and returns through the veins. So then we're going to talk about some valves right here real quick. Looking at the bottom with me, you see the diagram that I have the picture here. I have to move it a little larger here so you can see it. But typically we have two normal valves in our heart. One in which is an open valve, okay? And you can see the opening here where blood flows through. And remember that it flows in one direction. And then you have portions in your heart that have closed valves. Why do you have closed and open valves? You can also look with me on page 313. All right, so it tells you a little bit about that at the top. So blood travels through your body in a closed system of vessels, and that flows away from your heart. So that is closed. There are times in the aortic valves where they are going to be open. So let's talk about our blood, which is going to be on page 314 and 315. Now, when we typically think of our blood, we typically see through our veins as them looking blue, but really they are red, okay? So let's begin by talking about our red blood cells. Our red blood cells contains large amounts of hemoglobin. The hemoglobin is really what makes our blood red, okay? That's where it gets its color from. Now, think of the red blood cells as a delivery truck, because what it does is it travels through your body, and it's delivering throughout your body. Red blood cells are produced in the bone marrow, which we talked about that and had diagrams of that when we talked about the skeletal system. Then you have your white blood cells, which, think about your white blood cells as a police patrol car. They're traveling through, and they become very alert when they see a foreign virus or bacteria that's trying to come in and invade your body. And then they react on those right away to help fight infection. Of course, sometimes infection can't be fought at that time, and they have to be given medication, antibiotics, to help build up those red blood cells to fight that infection on. Think about, they are greatly outnumbered. There's a whole lot more red blood cells than there is white blood cells in your body. All right, let's move on and talk about our platelets. When you fall and get hurt, or you just have a cut or a scrape, your platelets are what takes steps in and causes the blood to clot. Now, our textbook likes to tell us here that our platelets are like an on-call emergency construction worker. I didn't really understand the greatness of that. Anyway, but when we get a cut, our platelets begin to clot or clump together to form a clot. And really that's the first step in repairing our body repairing itself, okay? Then, so we have our platelets. Then we have plasma. Now, look at it here in the diagram here. It's the clear yellowish part at the top, which is about 50% of our blood, 55%, which is mostly water. And that transports various substances through the circulatory system. Right here in the middle is the very small portion of the white blood cells and platelets in our composition of our blood. Red blood cells are about 45%. Let's quickly talk about the blood flow, which, if you look with me on page 315, you will see, but I also took a picture of the diagram right here. It has numbers that come from our textbook as well. So number one, everybody find number one on the chart here, all right? So remember, we have 4 chambers of the heart. All right, so it starts with number 1. So your heart has a series of valves, which you've already talked about, that prevent the backflow of blood into the chambers. So blood returning from the body enters the right atrium and passes through the right ventricles. Okay? When the right ventricles contract, because remember it's a muscle and muscles contract, the blood moves to the pulmonary arteries on to the lungs, which if you see that, that is referring to number 4. You see that at the top. So after the blood has dropped off its carbon dioxide and picks up oxygen at the lungs, it returns to the pulmonary veins, which is number 5. So it does its little loop there and returns to the pulmonary veins. And then it enters the left atrium, which is here. Number 6 is your left atrium. And then blood returns or enters the left ventricle, which is number 7, which is down here. Here's also a number 1. You see the process there. So as the left ventricle contracts, then blood rushes to the aorta. Everybody find number 8. That's the big one up here, and that is your aorta. That is the large vessel that branches off into the smaller vessels, and you see these smaller vessels up here at the top there. I think there's 3. All right, so that's how our blood flows. This actually is talking about exactly what I just said on this screen, but I really read it through you with the diagram. All right, so let's quickly talk about our pulse. Okay, if you go over with me to page 316, you can see that a heart pumps. The blood passes into the arteries with such force that they swell slightly. Now, you'll feel force when you take your pulse. And we'll practice taking our pulse when we come back to school next week. All right? We won't be able to do that today, of course. But the pulse, so by pressing your artery next to your bone at the wrist, I'm not going to go into that a little more, you can feel your heart beating there in your pulse, okay? Now, let's move on and talk quickly about blood pressure. So the pressure of the circulating blood against the walls of the arteries is called the blood vessels. Even between heartbeats, there is some pressure in the arteries, and the pressure forces or pushes the blood through the arteries and is on the capillaries of the body. So we will also try to take some blood pressure next week when we come back into the classroom as well. All right, so today you are going to finish up by writing your terms for 15B. Make sure you send me a picture of those so that I can give you credit for those. All right, guys, have a great day.